let's begin. Welcome, everyone. I would like to welcome you all on behalf of Agahan University's Institute for the Study of Muslim Civilizations. My name is Sevgi Adak. I'm an assistant professor here at ISMC, and it's my great pleasure this evening to introduce you our speakers, Dr. Celia Jenkins and Dr. Ümit Çetin. Celia and Ümit are both lecturers in sociology at University of Westminster, and they've been working together for I think, last 7 years on the Alevi identity in general, but especially on transnational Alevi identities, and particularly on the case of London Alevi community. They were published on issues around Alevi identity several times, but most recently they edited a special issue together with Professor Suavi Aydın of Hacettepe University in Ankara, a special issue for the journal National Identities entitled Alevism as an Ethno-Religious Identity, Contested Boundaries, which will be also published as a book next year by Routledge. So today they're going to talk about Alevi identity among second-generation Alevis in the UK, and particularly the influence of the introduction of Alevi lessons as part of the compulsory religious education curriculum in some of the British schools here in London, and how introduction of these courses affected the identity formation among young Alevis in London. These Alevi lessons are also actually results of Celia and Ümit's project, which they led in collaboration with the Alevi Center here in London and also the local schools. It is really a unique project in the sense that these lessons are the first Alevi lessons ever designed and introduced in the world. So in that sense, I think it's really a valuable, beneficial, and interesting example for other minority groups in the UK, but also for other Alevi communities elsewhere. And for this really unique project, they won the British Education Research Association Prize in 2014. So today we will have the chance to learn more about the details of this project. And without further ado, I would like to leave the floor to Celia and Ümit. We're going to talk roughly about 40 minutes or so, and then I will open the floor for the Q&A.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, Celia, for inviting us, and we're delighted to be here and delighted to see you here too today. And so what we'd like to do is just to explain what we're going to talk about, to give you a bit of background to the Alevi community in the UK as an ethno-religious community, to look at the particular condition of the second generation and fears around negative identity and disaffection, what we call anomic disaffection, and suicide, which was the subject of Ümit's PhD, and to look at the research, how we got to be interested in the idea of the possibility of Alevism lessons in schools as part of the religious education curriculum. And Sevi just said that these are the first schools in the world to teach RE. In fact, there are lessons going on in Germany and several other European countries on Alevism, not in Turkey at all. But in this country, they're the first to be part of a core religious education curriculum rather than as an option which students can choose to study. So that's kind of our unique claim to fame, perhaps. But so I'm going to hand over to Ümit, who's going to give you the context to the Alevi community, and then I'm going to talk about the work that we did with the community and schools.
Okay. Before I start, I would like you to just spend 1 minute to have a look at this text, please.
You read it, Ümit.
Okay, yeah, so it is a story of a student who was going to school in Turkey in the 1980s and 1990s. So I am an Alevi Kurd who grew up in a remote Alevi village in Turkey. I experienced the forbidden nature of this identity once I started secondary school in the nearby town. At home, I was instructed not to disclose my Alevi identity if I wanted to do well at school. We were punished and excluded despite the fact that it was the majority Sunni nationalist Turks who started the fights, often encouraged by the teachers of the schools. During Ramadan, I tried to pass as a Muslim by fasting until I got home from school, and at other times tried to match my Sunni peers' religious experience, and was even recruited into a Muslim youth group. Interviews with Alevis educated in Turkish schools around the same time tell a similar story. If anyone is from Turkey who was an Alevi, who was going to school in that 1980s and 1990s context, would probably recognize this. Does anybody share the similar experience? Yeah? There's Alkan there. Yeah, so this is just some background for you, for us to understand what was the situation for an Alevi student in a Turkish school. When I said the Turkish school, we are particularly talking about the region that Alevis were the minority, especially Central Anatolia. So, and those Alevis are predominantly Kurdish ethnically. Of course, by no means I'm generalizing. Maybe somewhere in big cities the situations were different, but this is the predominant kind of general experience of many Alevis that we have interviewed with Celia, and it is agreed by many Alevis. So, as Celia mentioned, this project that we are doing together is a process which actually started with my PhD. When I was doing my PhD, I was looking at the high rates of suicide amongst the second generation Alevi young men in London. Again, Alevi people from the community would know that there was a big issue, suicide amongst the second generation young Alevi men, and there was lots of moral panic, rumors, and there was a lot of victim blaming and blaming others in the community because people were not familiar with this type of suicide. That doesn't mean that suicide never happened in the Alevi communities. There was always suicide, but not young men. It was the first time Alevi community was faced with such a new phenomenon, and they wanted to make sense of it, and there was lots of ideas circulating within the community, and I wanted to take a sociological perspective and to situate this in a context to understand what was happening sociologically. So, again, to just give you some context for the research and for the suicide, I would like to look at I did an ethnography. I would like to just map out the settlement of the Alevi community here in London. So, there are, just to briefly, around 20 million Alevis living in Turkey. These numbers are contested because there are no accurate statistics, so it varies, but it's mainly agreed that there are around 20 million Alevis living in Turkey. And Alevi history is the history of denial and persecution since especially 1916, since the 16th century. And Alevi felt that they have been discriminated against. There were lots of massacres against Alevis, and since the 16th century almost, and under the modern Turkish Republic, a majority of Alevis start coming to the UK. The migration was a general thing for Alevis, but migration to London starts from 1980s onwards, and first generation were predominantly asylum seekers. When the community was settled in London, we can see that there was a kind of sense of collective identity, coherent community. It's quite important, especially to understand suicide, because having a coherent, integrated community, according to research, is a preventive factor. It reduces suicide risks. So this was the case for the first generation Alevi people, although they came here, they came here as asylum seekers because they didn't speak any English, because they didn't know much. They were settling down around the community centers in the same areas of London, working in the same industry, same sectors like textile factories predominantly. And activities of the community centers, such as organizing events, weddings, cultural events. So the first generation was highly kind of developing a coherent identity. And I use the term segregated integration because it was an internally integrated community, but not necessarily into the mainstream British society. And of course, there was a very strong transnational engagements because most of the first generation came here, left their children, their wives, their families there. So there was constant dialogue, constant communication. They were sending money, and so there was cultural, economic, political, also political atmosphere in Turkey. Again, was kind of highly connected to what was happening here in Turkey. So people were highly active around certain issues, and this brought people together and reduced the risk of anomie, which is one of the main causes of suicide for the first generation. So, but when we look at the second generation, the picture is not that promising. So again, I wanted to understand what was happening that is making the second generation young men more prone to suicide compared to the first generation, who are supposed to be most vulnerable to this kind of issues. But when I look at the experience of the second generation, I was trying to understand which trajectories they are following that lead them to a suicide-prone context, which I defined as rainbow underclass. It's a concept that I borrowed from Cortes et al. So when I started looking at their experiences, I interviewed people who knew that that somebody commits, who knew a suicide victim, if you like. And also, I'm myself a member of that community, so I knew people who committed suicide. So I've got an ethnographic insight as well. And when I started, of course, to do my PhD, I wanted to see the causes of suicide. It was a very ambitious position, but then gradually I was convinced that that's not possible because you can't find the causes, but maybe you can find the process by which some people are getting towards a position, a social context in which they can commit suicide. So I wanted to identify the trajectories that these young people are taking. So this is, if I use the concept from Weber, is the ideal type suicide case. An ideal type suicide case is the one that who is experiencing the negative identity, as religious as well as ethnic identity. I'm going to talk about, maybe Celia will talk about it later on, but negative identity was one of the characteristics of these suicide cases. And when I just follow their story, I realized that most of them, especially the 8 suicide cases that I looked closely, they were doing really badly in school. Okay, first they were telling me that how great they were at school, primary school, to a certain age. But then at particular point, they were all kind of disconnecting themselves from education, moving more into kind of, when I said gang involvement, this shouldn't be understood as like the big gangs that go and kill each other or sell drugs. There are gangs, they were calling themselves as postcode gangs, which are small postcode gangs. So basically, probably young friends over there might be able to explain it to us better. They were basically forming small groups at schools, fighting with other ethnic groups, especially Somalian black Muslim students. They were one of the kind of most, the group that they were fighting most. So when I wanted to, I interviewed people further. So religion played a big role there because they were going to the same school with this group of people, and so they're not doing really well at school. Lots of kind of antisocial, anti-authority involvements, and troubled relationships with their parents, particularly because parents always told their children that they came here for their future, especially boys. There is a culturally as well, there is a greater expectations from boys than girls, because they were saying, we came here for a better future for you, and what you are doing, you're not doing really well at school. So the boys felt so much under pressure. Their relationship with their parents were not really great because they in many ways failed their parents. Their relationship with their schools was also not really good because they didn't do well and they were just going there to have a laugh. Their relationship with their peers after a certain age also deteriorated for various reasons. Because the lifestyle that they were following was not necessarily a kind of satisfying lifestyle. It was an everyday life, so there was not a clear direction for these people to follow. So this led to anomic suicide. I'm just talking about the kind of ideal type suicide case. An anomic suicide that's taking place in a context that I defined as rainbow underclass. Rainbow underclass is a group of, it's a social class made up of all people from different ethnic, religious background, but not necessarily successful. That we can call them maybe the failures of all groups or ethnic groups or classes. So it is characterized by chronic anomie, if you like. So this is the context in which suicide was taking place. And to go back to the point again, school was one of the most important marker in this research, because I realized that at one particular year, they started saying, look, there's nothing to do with us at school. That instead of going to learn something, they were only going to school to have fights, to then gradually get involved in kind of petty crimes, and they put themselves in a situation that they were constantly producing some trouble for themselves. So they got in trouble with the authorities eventually, with schools, they were expelled, and with their parents, with their peers as well. So school was one of the most important space, if you like, for these people, and it was a starting point. And then I would like Sylvia to talk about, because it's your aim.
Thank you very much. Yeah. So in 2010, the university was approached by the London Alevi community, and the community had already been very active in their concern to try and find solutions to the problem of suicide. What could they do to help their young people? And they came to us. They've been involved with other local organisations, the council, health professionals, police, youth workers, and they've done a lot to try and find avenues to support their young people. And they came to us as well and said, is there anything that you can do to help our young people? And so we visited the centre and talked to the committee, and they said, well, meet our young people and let them tell you what they feel. But our concern is that because they don't really have a very strong sense of what an Alevi identity means, it's not giving them a sense of belonging, a sense of a meaningful identity, which you normally associate with a religious identity, that it kind of binds you to a community, gives you a meaning in life and a guide to how you live that life. And they said the young people felt like they had a very negative identity, and what could we do to change that? So we visited the youth centre, the youth club at the Alevi Federation in 2010, 2011, and started talking to them. And the stories that they told us were really moving. They said they went to school and nobody knew that they were Alevi except for other Alevi pupils in the school. So they said that they were always, teachers related to them as if they were Muslim, and would try to engage them talking about Muslim festivals and culture, and wouldn't really get any response because the Alevi students knew that they weren't Muslim, and so they weren't practicing the same faith or culture. So they said, well, we kind of describe ourselves as sort of Muslim, and that's kind of as best we can do in talking about our religion on the whole, because most of the time, because the religion had been so suppressed in Turkey, it's been hard to learn very much about it. So it was a sense of an identity, but actually trying to fill out the details of what it meant to be Alevi and to be able to describe and explain that to other people was quite problematic. and students struggled to do that. So they found it much easier just to say that they were kind of sort of Muslim, and other people could relate to them on that basis. And some students said, well, they went to their RE classes where they learnt about lots of other religions, but nobody knew about their religion, and they felt kind of quite excluded by that. And one student told the story of how, they were asked what their religion was, and she put her hand up and said that she was Alevi, and the teacher had never heard of Alevism, and so thought that she was just messing around. And she ended up getting into trouble, and her father had to come in and say, yes, we are Alevi, and she wasn't kind of being disrespectful or anything. This was really their experience. And we said, well, what might help you? What might make you feel better, to feel a bit more included at school? And somebody came up with the idea that, well, it's RE lessons where we feel kind of the most alienated, disaffected. So maybe if people taught about our religion in RE lessons, then we could, it might help in a way, because that would explain our religion. So neither Amit nor I are religious, and we kind of wouldn't have thought of that solution for ourselves, which is why it's really important to be talking to the community, to engaging with them, and see how they thought that we might be able to help. And so together with the community and a local school, which had very close connections with the community, there was a teaching assistant and a lot of pupils at the school were Alevi. It was a primary school. And they were very happy to engage with us and try and begin the process of developing lessons on Alevism. And it took quite a long time because there are very few materials on Alevism. So we spent many evenings at the Cultural Centre actually trying to find content to be able to teach about Alevism. And then we worked with a teacher to be able to kind of put it into a kind of curriculum framework for religious education, which is where you kind of learn about and learn from religion rather than learning how to be a good religious person. And in 2011, we were able to launch the first lessons in primary school for Key Stage 1, 5 to 7-year-olds. And it was actually very interesting. That's okay. I was just wondering if it's affecting the presentation. What was very interesting was that the school didn't really know that they had Alevi pupils, because when you register for school, you're invited to put your religion, and many of the Alevi parents hadn't put down Alevism as their religion. In fact, quite a lot of them have put down Muslim as their religion, because that's what it said on their identity cards. And they were perhaps a little uncertain about the kind of reception they might receive here if they put that they were Alevi. They didn't want to risk their children being subject to any discrimination. And so the school was generally unaware of the Alevi pupils having a kind of distinct identity. And but they were concerned that their Turkish pupils, who were predominantly Alevi, were underachieving, and they couldn't understand kind of what was happening and what they could do to support their achievements. So they were really pleased that the community were engaging with them and thinking about, happy to support the idea of developing Alevi lessons. And we had a launch assembly for the lessons, and this is a picture of it with the chair of the London Alevi Cultural Centre at the time. And it was really interesting because they were being played some music, some Alevi music, and some of the children recognised that, but didn't necessarily know that they were Alevi. And this started a dialogue with they went home to their parents and said, well, they were playing this Alevi music and we play it at home, are we Alevi? And so there was kind of parents who then started to make contact with the Alevi Centre to say, well, actually, we'd quite like to know more about what's going on as well. And it generated quite a dialogue. But the first lessons, 6 lessons on Alevism growing up in an Alevi home, were a big success. And actually quite often we had Alevi visitors going to the school to observe the lessons, and one of the religious leaders came to a lesson, and others, we were there at the time as well, others talked about what it was like for them. And the children were in the class, a very multiculturally diverse school, and a diverse class. And the teacher said, now, how many of you are Alevi? And the children shot up their hands, and it actually moved some of the Alevi people to tears, because that was so different to their experience of having been Alevi at school growing up in Turkey, as we saw from the kind of prologue. But anyway, the lessons were a success, and there were kind of exhibitions at sort of cabinet in the school which had Alevi artifacts, and a sense that they were very much a part of the school. And although kind of it was an early stage, actually the teachers were so keen on the project when they discovered they had Alevi pupils in their school that virtually all classes taught it in the first year, even though we'd only designed it for Key Stage 1. And so most of the school had access to the lessons. And the project was actually a much greater success than we could ever have anticipated. Parents were coming into school, they were ringing up the school to find out, other parents were ringing up the school to find out if they could have Alevi lessons in their school. And the project was praised in the government inspection in 2012. And there was a kind of a significant improvement both in the pupils' behaviour and in academic achievement for the Year 6 pupils. And this could be seen as possibly partly a response to the project. But they'd gone and talked to the Standing Advisory Committee on Religious Education about kind of to get permission for the lessons to go ahead, and they'd taken their books along and talked about what it meant to be Alevi, and were very impressive in terms of persuading the committee that the lessons were a good thing. Because in British law, the 1996 Education Act allows for, although it says that education, religious education, which is compulsory in all schools, has to be predominantly Christian, it does allow for the fact that in local areas, the RE teaching can reflect the local population and the faiths of the local population. So on those grounds, in the areas that we were teaching had a significant Alevi population, and we got approval for lessons to go ahead in the schools. Building on the success of a primary school, we then approached a secondary school in Islington, where again quite a lot of the Alevi community were attending the school. And one of the pupils went to the head teacher and said, could we have lessons on Alevism in RE? And the head teacher approached the head of RE, who said, well, okay, as long as the Alevi pupils in the school are involved. So we had a planning committee of 16 Alevi students at the school who helped to design the lessons. Again, a lot of work went into designing the lessons with members of the community and the teacher putting together a set of 6 lessons to be taught to Year 9 at Key Stage 3. And again, there was a very positive response from the pupils to the lessons. And they were interested to learn about a religion that most of them hadn't heard about. There were Alevi pupils in the class who were able to participate and contribute their knowledge. And it was really interesting to see kind of their responses to it. Quite recently, we went back to the school. The lessons have continued, although they haven't been taught in subsequent years by the Alevi pupils, because it became too difficult to take them out of their lessons, get permission for them to miss their other lessons to teach it. But members of the community have taught it, and that's gradually being handed over to the teachers to be able to teach it, so that that can go into other schools and RE teachers can teach Alevism. But just to get a flavour of what the young people said when we talked to them about how they felt the lessons had gone, we've got a couple of extracts here. That one of the pupils said, well, when I was younger, I just said I was Muslim because I did not know anything about Alevism. I did not know how to explain it to people, but now I'm saying I'm Alevi. And pupils were saying, well, actually, now we can say we're Alevi without having to add a whole lot of explanation to what it means to be Alevi, because it's taught in RE, other pupils know what it means, and by teaching it, it's given it some legitimacy in the eyes of other children, that it's a credible religion and a valued belief system, and they're not getting any pressure from other pupils as a result. So that's been a really positive response as well. As a result of these lessons, we can say that these are the first schools in the world to teach Alevism as part of the core religious curriculum, and indeed it is being taught in other schools across the country now. And we're in the process of finalising a curriculum pack of all the lessons, and we brought in a consultant to do that, to help us to do that, to produce them to a professional standard, and so that other schools can use those materials and teach about Alevism where they've got pupils of Alevi heritage. And the lessons have been used before, really before 2015 and the coup and changes in Turkey, attempted coup. There was also an attempt to use our lessons as a kind of a case for saying, well, if Alevism is being taught in schools in the UK, why isn't it being taught in schools in Turkey? And to make the case for that. I think that's much more difficult in the current climate to do. And there's been a massive shift amongst Alevi youth, which is mainly due to the work of the Alevi young people within the federation. There's a youth federation, there are Alevi societies going on in universities, and a real sense of a kind of proud to be Alevi identity that's really noticeable when you go to the Alevi centres now. And much greater sense amongst the Alevi community that they belong to school as Alevis, and that other people know about them and accept them. And that's been a really positive thing. And so there have been some other sort of impacts from the research, such as a parents group was set up at the primary school, and they threw up issues about what was concerning them about their children's education, and the school was working with them to see what they could do to support them. In fact, kind of one of their main concerns, it was mainly mothers who attended this meeting, one of their main concerns was actually that they felt they were doing all the work with the children, and what about the fathers? They weren't setting a good example. So if there are fathers here, please note that mothers were wanting their fathers to set a positive example to the children. So the school was talking about how they might involve fathers better. At secondary school, there's been a very successful after-school club, which was run by Alevi youth for pupils in the school, and this continued for a number of years, and it was very popular amongst the Alevi pupils in the school. They felt they had a place where they could talk about things and learn more about their religion, and it's been a really tremendous initiative. Also, kind of as a wider set of implications, the Alevi community applied for recognition by the Charity Commission in 2015, and part of the case they were able to draw on the fact that there were Alevism lessons going on in schools, and that's been an important part of their case. It's also had an impact on our teaching and research, and I was talking about our project in an RE lesson. Sorry, in a sociology class about RE lessons, and one of the students went home and put on Facebook, "This is the first time in the whole of my education that Alevism has been mentioned, and my identity has been affirmed," and he said he felt like he was on top of the world as a result of it. So I don't know if I can ever claim to have had that much impact on other students, but it certainly felt good for me as well. And but also what I think has been important was that we've been able to use our knowledge to support the work of the community, and it's been a very collaborative project working with the community, and it's very easy for researchers to go in and think that they know it all and can just kind of impose their research agendas on other people. But actually it's been a tremendous learning experience for us, and we tried to use our knowledge in the best way possible to support the activities of the community, which is a very vibrant and active community, to promote these lessons. And we felt that the model that we offered of kind of drawing on the community to provide the content for lessons, that there are other minority faith communities who perhaps feel similar alienations of a lack of belonging in school, that they could use our model to know how to apply to have RE lessons on their faith included as well in the curriculum. As a result of the research that we've done and the work that we've done over the last 7 years with the community, one of their concerns has been to to be able to be included in the national census as a distinct ethnic group, a religious group. And one of the things is that in Turkey they don't get identified as a distinct ethno-religious group. And so it felt important to be able to identify them in this country. And we conducted a survey to be able to try and map how many Alevis are in the UK and to be able to describe them as part of the case for the census. And we conducted a pilot study, and we're now kind of thinking about how we can move that forward in the service of the community to help raise their profile. So thank you very much for listening. We hope that we've been able to explain something about the work that we've been doing, and it's just been an absolutely amazing experience for us. And
thank you so much, Celia, for this extremely rich, interesting, and very reflective, presented in a very reflective way presentation. I have many questions myself, because obviously it resonates in so many ways with the experiences of Alevis or even non-religious Sunnis in Turkey. But I don't want to hijack the whole Q&A session, so I open the floor for questions from the audience first. Yes, please. Sorry, do we need to give the microphone? Just a moment. Oh, okay.
Thank you for a very interesting talk. I heard about Alevis, you see, but initially I was confused with Alevites, you see, in Syria. You see, my son lives in Hackney, and there are a lot of Kurds and Turkish people there. And I went to a shop, and just in a conversation, a young lady explained to me about what Alevis are, and she mentioned also that they are also Jalaluddin Rumi, Konya, and all that sort of thing. Then I read up something, and what I find very surprising, Hesi Baktar, is this something?
Hacı Bektaş.
Hacı Bektaş. There where the lot of Alevis reside, or they come from there. And of course, whether I'm just understanding the part of the Eastern Roman Empire, you see, where there is shamanism, Nestorian, and all that sort of thing, whether you're part of that group. And it seems to me that there is a sort of a negative way of definition, that they are not observing fast, they don't go to Hajj, they don't pay zakat and all that. So what are the basic tenets of Alevis, you see, so that like even Ismailis are not universally recognized. They know the Aga Khan and the horse race and all that sort of thing. But if I ask the ordinary chap in his street about Ismailis, the same thing would come ignorant about that. So I just want to like to know, what are the basic religious tenets, or are there any tenets so that people can understand?
This is actually a very difficult question. But do you want to respond immediately, or do you want to collect a few questions?
good to clarify.
Yeah, okay,
Yeah.
let's clarify that one.
Yeah.
Shall I?
You do, yes.
Wait, this is the biggest question, not only for outsiders but for the Alevis themselves. And we decided with Celia not to get into that territory because it is such a contested area. Alevis themselves are divided for this particular definition, over the definition of what is Alevism. But what we are doing here with Celia is we are trying to follow sociologically what Alevis are doing here in the UK at the moment, at current climate. But where do they belong to? Some people think that they belong to Islam. They are actually the core of Islam. Some Alevi believe that they are the core of Islam. Some Alevi believe that it's just a religion that existed before Islam. And we don't know, and we are not really interested in what Alevism is, but I can tell you certain features of Alevism. For example, for Alevis, the most important, one of the most important rituals is Cem, isn't it? Cem, where they gather in a Cemevi,
Yeah.
and they there is a Dede, which is the spiritual leader, and who leads the Cem, and they fast for 12 days.
But not during the Ramadan.
Not during the Ramadan. That's yeah. And what else? Alevi people are here in the classroom. So if anything else that you want to.
There are different practices as well.
Yeah. Can I just one point? The point that you made about negative definition. That's a very good question. Actually, it's a very important point to clarify. When I said the negative definition in PowerPoint slides, actually this was one of the negative identity. This is one of the things that I needed to talk about it. Yes, Alevis, especially young Alevi people, always could only define themselves in the negative terms. When in school, when they said, "Who are you?" When they answered that I am an Alevi, they had to. The following question was, "Who are Alevi? What is Alevism?" And they had to say, "Okay, we don't fast, we don't go to mosque, we don't go to Hajj, we don't do this." So it was a negative definition. I mean, sociologically speaking, there is nothing wrong with it because it's a relational definition. There are lots of other identities that are defined through not being. But this was a crucial point because when you had this, I'm proud to be Alevi, it was kind of a shift from that negative definition to a positive one. Say that instead of saying I'm not this, they are now saying I am this, and so that is the shift that we are actually talking about. The shift from a negative identity, which is through not being, to a positive identity that's I'm proud to be Alevi. And also now they are confident to say, listen, I'm an Alevi. It's up to you to go and find out who we are. So I'm not going to constantly justify my Alevi identity. So I hope that answers your question. I mean, where do they belong to? I
don't want to hog the discussion.
Can we just come back to this
just
later?
One word.
Yeah, okay.
Just one word. You see, that gives, sort of not confidence, Anavis, you mentioned, that like the Shia, they say we call ourselves Muslim, so that it gives an Umayyan identity.
Yeah.
Whereas that gives you a sort of not confident enough, to say something. That probably.
You're absolutely right in many ways because when I was doing my research, so many Alevi people thought that the reason why Alevi young men are killing themselves is because they don't have a sense of belonging and also a sense of they don't have faith. They don't have a religion. But yes, it's true. When a Muslim person is probably much better situated in the overall ummah, and there are social practices that constantly link them to the society, such as going to mosque 5 times a day. But
of course, it would be,
yeah.
I think, very difficult for them to redefine themselves as Muslims because historically speaking, Alevi identity, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but has been described as being non-Muslim.
Heretic.
That's not belonging, in a sense, to the majority Muslim identity. So, any other questions, comments? Yes, please.
Comments?
Yes, please.
Oh,
there is, yeah.
I have very brief 2 questions. One is that researching on suicide within a community context and being an insider, did you find any resistance from Generation 1 about researching this issue? That is the number 1 question I have. And the second is that just an interpretation, and especially when you are designing curriculum, in a context where there is a diasporic, situatedness of Alevi community, if I'm right in saying that. In your conceptual imagination, how you negotiate between tension between diaspora and multiculturalism, if at all? Or does this variable or the relationship is sharp enough in your research context that it does matter? Is the question clear?
The second question.
The second question is, for example, if you can elaborate. For example, in my small-scale research in Canada, I found that there is some negotiation happening, or sometimes boundary crossing, between the notion of diaspora, when community is defining as a collectivity, and multiculturalism, where second generation is situated currently. So, for example, sometimes in boundary making, diasporic identity needs to reinforce certain traditions, a memory of home. And sometimes that memory plays differently vis-a-vis the reality of new societies. So it becomes sharp at the second generation, but the generation one becomes the custodian of that boundary. Do you find this tension in your ethnographic data?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Yeah. I start with the second question. Yes, there was a tension, and that was one of the reasons when I said there was the relationship between a troubled personal relationship between their parents, also with the mainstream Alevi community, because the first generation was not used to, in many ways, living in such a diverse, multicultural, cosmopolitan context, and they had fear to lose their children to certain groups, and this was the tension, and the young men were not very happy to maintain that cultural or religious or ethnic identity that the first generation wanted to carry on or to reinforce. So in that sense, there was a tension. And the second one, did I resistance? No, everyone in many ways were quite helpful. If anything, they all wanted to find out what was really going on. So whoever I approached, especially the community center, the community spokesperson, the elderlies, everyone actually wanted to help me to carry the research to find out what was really going on, because it was a new phenomenon in the community to understand what was happening to these young men. They were all asking these questions. What is wrong with these people? Why are they killing themselves? So I didn't experience any kind of resistance in that sense.
Thank you.
We will have one comment and then here.
I can say I'm just getting that. I compare this the issue, the Alevi issue, with other migrant communities like the Sikhs, for example. It's fascinating that Sikhism as a faith actually is a developing faith, and in fact, the faith actually has developed via migration in the same way that you're describing the Alevi faith. Of course, Sikhs themselves will perhaps not agree with my point. In fact, they're very angry, actually. But I think the fact is fact that Sikhism is primarily Punjabis or particular castes, untouchables and untouchable Hindu castes, and the other caste primarily Shudra castes. So, for example, Sikhs who claim to be Jat, which is apparently higher, but actually Shudra, which is actually the lowest caste. But because they're higher than the untouchable, and because they've got some economic status via immigration, they have gained stature. I mean, this is a fascinating sort of conundrum. And of course, the faith itself, which probably even now, look, I'm an outsider, but it's a faith which is developing. It's a faith which is describing sort of a theological notion of itself, which actually, frankly, as I say, it's a form of peasant people, of the subalterns, if you like. This is my view, I'm an outsider. But I think the same thing probably will happen with the Alevi community as well, because if you're saying to me, because this is the first time, I mean, I sort of notionally know a little bit about Alevi, it's my thing, a little bit. I'm a Bengali Muslim, so perhaps I'm complete outsider in that, but what I'm getting at that is that the people I've spoken to suggested that there were Muslims because
They were,
and that the word Alevi itself is a reference to one of the most important Muslims, first Muslims, Hazrat Ali, because you know in Islam there were two branches, well, part of the same faith, but there are people who follow Hazrat Ali. And that this has a connection with Hazrat Ali. And of course, a lot of accretions, local traditions, pre-Islamic traditions, but this is as true of the Bedouins who become Wahhabis in Saudi Arabia. That if you look at the history of how Wahhabism arose, it's because a lot of the Bedouins themselves had gone back to worshipping the pre-Islamic forms. For for example, working with trees. This was very common in the 18th
If you
century.
can just wrap up.
The point I'm making is that really that it's a fascinating phenomenon, it's a developing phenomenon. But this would probably happen in the way the Sikh faith is developed amongst the diaspora faith. In fact, they'll become the custodians of this faith. This is what I'm getting at. I don't know how you relate to that fact.
So we have a question here. Leia, here.
Thank you. Thank you. It was absolutely fascinating and very, very impressive. Congratulations on your research. A couple of questions. You started out by talking about suicide, and I'm just wondering if it's too early to see if the suicide rates have indeed changed. I had a PhD student who worked with Alevi community here in London a number of years ago, and he noted the same thing. And he worked especially on death rituals and new death rituals that had been.
What was his name?
Besim Jones.
Yeah, he was there actually in one of the photos at school. Besim was there.
I see.
Isn't he now at Metro?
Yes, he is. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so I just want to know if it's too soon to know about that, and then. I'm a little uncomfortable with the kind of one-to-one correlation you're sort of implying about, okay, this enemy, therefore suicide. Well, you have to also compare situations that have similar enemy without suicide. I'm just wondering if Alevi communities in Oslo, in Berlin, in Paris, in Frankfurt, also have experienced this or not. I worked a long time ago with Alevis in Germany, and at that time it wasn't a problem at all. Second generation, first or third or second and a half. The generations didn't segment as neatly as you describe. But so that's one thing. And then and if not, why not? And in Turkey, Alevis have been discriminated against and persecuted far more than in the diaspora. But do we see analogous suicides there? I mean, we haven't seen the kind of massacres here that we had in Sivas or in Mosh or Mush or, Kahramanmaraş or anything like that, or Dersim, so. And then the last very quick thing, at the beginning you talked about they identified as Kurdish Alevis, and I was intrigued by that. I've worked particularly with Zaza-speaking Alevis who do not call themselves Kurds at all. To them, Kurd means Sunni. So I'm intrigued to hear that that maybe it's different here.
Yeah. Okay, I'll start with the first question. Yes, there has been a decline in suicide rates. It's not disappeared, but for last 2 years we have fewer suicide cases. But last summer, actually this summer, there were 2 suicide cases, but it's not as it used to be. Okay, Anomi in other contexts in Europe, amongst the Alevi communities, unfortunately, I was only focusing on the Alevi community, Kurdish Alevi community in the UK. Again, I mentioned Kurdish because now I'm going to explain. Because the people who come to the UK are predominantly Kurdish. They are Alevis from the Kurdish regions.
I understand that, but do they call themselves Kurdish, or do they speak? They speak.
They speak Kurdish. They speak Kurmanji. Some of them, because for Alevi people, like you rightly said, for some Alevi people, saying Kurdish is associated with Shafi Islam, so that's Sunni. That's why they want to distinguish themselves. Also, in Alevi belief, they think that they shouldn't discriminate against any other ethnic group, so they say we are Alevi. So Alevi is the umbrella term. However, most of the Alevi people in the UK define themselves Kurdish Alevis. They have, because again, it's to do with the political discourses happening here as well as in Turkey, because the Kurdish issue is also important for the Alevi people who are living in the UK. But I totally agree with you. There are still divisions within the Alevi community along the ethnic lines as well. So why there was no, I didn't look at the other European countries' suicide rates, but I know that there is still high rates of anomy, if I may use the term again in a sociological sense, because in Germany, for example, anomy is manifesting itself through other things, such as drug use, such as gang involvement. But suicide is the extreme end of anomy here. In the UK, it's showing itself in that form. Or why there were no suicide in Turkey? I think that's it's a very good, interesting question. It's like the Jewish communities. When I did my PhD, I was looking at suicide rates in Europe when Durkheim was doing his study. There was very low suicide rates among the Jewish communities, despite the fact that they were all discriminated, excluded, oppressed. It is quite like the first generation Alevi, when they were kind of not, they were in Turkey, when they were discriminated, they formed close communities. And this closeness kind of created a sense of coherent, unique identity. They felt they belonged to the community. That's why there is an analogy between the Jewish communities in Western Europe when Durkheim was doing his studies and the case of Alevi people, only in sense of like anomie and suicide. Whereas for this first generation, that kind of tradition followed, and it existed for the first generation as well. Because the first generation people were still highly connected to the transnational, to Turkey. They were so engaged, they were so busy, they were so motivated because they had clear purposes to work hard, to make money, to provide for their children. So they didn't, they came here for a purpose and they were working towards that goals. Whereas the second generation, the institutions that really regulated and integrated the first generation, seem to disappear because the first generation, second generation individuals are not happy. They don't want to live the life that their parents are living here in the UK, but they didn't also have any capital in to just go and integrate into the cosmopolitan, multicultural, diverse society because they were not doing really well at school. They didn't have any qualifications. So they didn't have anything to go and to sell in the market to really to integrate into the mainstream society.
Thank you.
Look, this is best.
Oh, I see him. Yep, yeah.
It was following us.
The successful project which you described seems also important in the context of the European Court of Human Rights decision last year, which prescribed the integration of material and Alevism as ethno-religious community, as you presented it, rather than only as a culture for the Turkish educational curriculum. Well, as you said, the political situation doesn't allow this right now, but this is also relevant to the Balkan states, Central Eastern Balkans, where Alevi communities are indigenous, at least from the 15th century. So it will be an interesting possibility to extend some of these achievements and offer these to states like Bulgaria, Macedonia, Greece, etc. But my question is about, let's say, Holland, where I know the Alevi Associations of Europe funded a chair last year in Leiden, I think. And I was wondering whether there has been a similar comparable development also in primary and secondary school, because from what I know, the Alevi community is also proactive in Holland. So is there a balance between this achievement on the higher educational level in the primary and secondary school level? And again, thank you for this illuminating talk.
The Dutch case.
Well, because we were expecting the Federation Chair to be here as well, probably he's driving and he couldn't make it. He would have answered this question well. At the moment, this project is really developing, and they want to use it in every single country that Alevi people are living. So the project was initiated in Germany by the Alevi communities, but in German schools it is just an option. Whereas in the UK, it's the first time. It's the first time it's a compulsory part of our curriculum, and they are now organizing symposium to educate the educators that can teach Alevism in schools in all European countries, as well as Canada, United States, Australia, everywhere. Yeah.
So, did you want to add something?
No, I think it's a really important point as to how we can disseminate the project and kind of use it for other communities as in other countries, and certainly that's our desire, that there's a set of good materials that can be adapted in different contexts. But
So two more questions.
My question actually is about the curriculum designing process, because I was involved in teaching humanities and social science back home, especially to teenagers in high school, and I wonder what items you selected in teaching this curriculum about Alevis, and does it include history or narratives about Alevis, about being an Alevi? and like, have you selected certain narratives over other narratives, or have you given certain tools to like search about these narratives or other contested items of being an Alawi? And also, how were like the class dynamics, like it happened like incidents of like some students either Alawi or Muslim, other Muslim sects, like, or like Sunni Muslim, or even like Christians, like raised their hands and like opposed something or said that it's not true, or we don't know this. Like, how was the dynamics, especially teaching such like a sensitive topic?
Yeah, thank you. It's a very good question, and the curriculum was designed within the framework of a national curriculum. So at each stage, Key Stage 1, 5 to 7, Key Stage 2, 7 to 11, Key Stage 3, 9 to 14, there are clear kind of ways of teaching, a clear kind of scheme of work around what each stage will include and focus on. So for Key Stage 1, the lower primary level, it was about growing up in the Alevi community, and that was the focus of the lessons. So there were lessons on the preparing for a gem ceremony, the kind of the lessons on the gem ceremony, linking the idea of kind of Alevi rules and values and how they connect with wider school rules and wider values. At Key Stage 2, it was about sort of Alevi kind of thinkers and sort of leaders. And the Key Stage 3, it was more around identity and sort of discrimination and the kind of more about the sort of origins of Alevism, and again looking at kind of issues of Alevi ceremonies and ideas and beliefs and practices. But the whole way in which it was taught in the classrooms, there were very rarely any tensions or conflicts, because it's taught within a kind of a very inclusive framework in which pupils know they need to respect each other's religions and faiths, and so it was done very much in a spirit of understanding and to be able to draw comparisons between shared beliefs and rituals and practices and so on. So I think there was in one of the schools, one of the Muslim parents did object to the lessons, but when they talked to the teacher and understood how it was being presented, then they were absolutely fine with it. So in fact, I think it's reduced the tensions particularly between Muslim pupils, who were very concerned that Alevi pupils were kind of, because they described themselves as sort of Muslim and yet they weren't kind of following Muslim practices. There was quite a lot of pressure from peers to try and make them into good Muslims, and that kind of stopped. There was a much better understanding once they'd had the lessons. But it was something that we were concerned about, and the ways in which we taught, the lessons were taught was kind of to look at areas of kind of difference and try and explore them in a very kind of positive and open way. But
so if I may use my position as a chair before the last question and ask a follow-up question to that, did you at any point in preparing the curriculum have to define Alevism? So what is the answer of the curriculum to the question what Alevism is? I know that you don't want to involve with this, question, but on the other hand, if you're preparing a curriculum, you more or less unavoidably putting a very rich, very diverse tradition into a format where an 8-year-old and 9-year-old, can understand. So how did you deal with that difficult task?
And in fact, that's an interesting point, because when we did the launch assembly for Key Stage 3 at the secondary school with the whole of Year 9, because only 2 classes actually got the lessons, one of the things that the pupils came away from saying was, well, we're not really very sure what Alevism is still. You haven't really defined it clearly enough for us. And that was still a problem. And we did try and get the pupils to kind of actually come up with a definition themselves based on the kind of things that we were telling them. But I think that, we do offer a kind of broad understanding of Alevism and defining it, but we do say that it's kind of contentious. And
All right. Okay.
What is the broad definition?
Sorry.
Well, there is no definition. We don't define it. If you like, we operationalized it. That was from the moment we sat down with the key figures in the community center, federation, spiritual leaders. There was never an agreement. We had to meet very often because we are academics and they are community centers.
Yeah.
They have an agenda, and they also are not a kind of familiar how to design curriculum to teach to particular age. So we had to negotiate. They never, what we do, we don't define Alevism, but we tell students what Alevis do. There is a diverse way of practicing Alevism, and I think there is an agreement. We have identified some common figures and common practices that are conducted by all Alevis, regardless of their position, their definition of Alevism.
And values.
And values, yeah. So it is about Alevi values, Alevi history, and Alevi practices. And this is how we designed it. There is no definition in this curriculum that this is Alevism. There is not a sharp definition, but we operationalize it. The pieces are there. You can join the puzzle in whichever way you want to. So in that sense, it's not limiting people or imposing one interpretation of Alevism to
Sorry,
any
we
other.
have another question. One last question. Yes.
I was going to ask that when it comes to teaching Alevism in schools and curriculum, is it because when I'm in secondary school and when I was in year 8 in my old school, we only had one lesson on Alevism, and the title was "What is Alevism?" and she gave us a simple definition, and it was a denomination of Islam that is associated with Prophet Ali. That was the definition. We watched a simple documentary on Alevism about a researcher, a journalist, something like that. Like this guy with long curly hair that went to Turkey, went to Istanbul, and he was talking to Alevis.
Peter,
Was it you?
In a previous life.
And it was just that, and then in the final 10 minutes we had to just do this post or something. It was a really bad explanation. And then afterwards I went to the teacher and said that we need to expand this because this is not how it works. And we went to primary schools, I went to primary schools explaining about Alevism, and then when I switched schools, it came to the new RE teacher. I said, she asked me, what religion are you? I said, I am Alevi. She's like, so she didn't believe me for a good 15 minutes until I told her to stop the lesson, look at what Alevism is. We were learning about Judaism or something like that, and she genuinely didn't believe me. So what I'm getting at is the curriculum only going to be 1 or 2 lessons, or I don't expect it to be a whole length of term, but is it going to be a week's lesson type thing? How long or how broad is the curriculum going to be?
We've designed 3 half units, so at each key stage there's a half unit on Alevism, which is 6 lessons usually. So they'll get that at Key Stage 1, and then at Key Stage 2 they'll get another 6 lessons, at Key Stage 3 another 6. And also next year has been involved in teaching some of them at the secondary school. But your experience is so common. And very interestingly, we were talking to the parents at the primary school afterwards, and they were saying, well, our children come home and they're telling us that Alevism is separate from Islam, and we're confused because we've always been taught that it's part of Islam, and so they're trying to kind of work out the meanings too. But we didn't want to ever impose a hard and fast definition, but particularly at Key Stage 3, there's opportunity to talk about different interpretations and debate that.
I can do briefly want to.
Just
very briefly, yes. Because you were teaching,
yes.
I think. Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Firstly, thank you for your presentation and all the work you've done. It really does mean a lot for second generation Alevis, as you've said. Just building on what Atishjan said, the reason some teachers teach as a denomination of Islam is because of the lack of knowledge they have. They go into Wikipedia maybe the day before the lesson, and the Wikipedia states that Alevism is a denomination of Islam because the Wikipedia page for Alevism is edited by the Religious Affairs Institute of the Turkish government. So it's a back and forth with them. And so for us teaching, the best and the most clear way to teach Alevism is the curriculum that you've created with Dedes and Anas and spiritual leaders, and with the Federation. And you can teach in 30 seconds if you want to, in a really clear way. But like Professor Umut said, Alevism, the Alevi Bektashi belief stretches from the Balkan Mountains to Central Asia. So to define it with one presentation or one answer is actually quite flawed. But personally, as a second generation Alevi, I don't believe it is a part of Islam. To say that we are Muslim would be an insult to Muslims, because we don't practice with faith like this. Again, thank you for all you've done and the presentation as well.
Thank you. Okay, just if it's a very brief question. All right.
Just a brief question.
Yeah.
So with the identity of
Wait for the
Alevi,
microphone. Sorry.
so now with the curriculum, with the identity of Alevis articulated in books, do you think the second generation will start their identity will be shaped in a different way from the first generation, and can they still relate with the community back home as well?
I think yes, it's a very good question. I would say that, do you want to start or shall I?
I think what was really important for the first generation was, in a sense, that many of them who came here as asylum seekers came partly because of being persecuted for their religion. And here they could actually express their religion, and that was a really positive thing for them, to be able to embrace and explore and practice their religion much more freely here. And for the second generation, in a sense, there's been a kind of it's been an empty signifier in a way, that this is the kind of, which accounts for negative identity, the kind of lack of knowledge and parents not being able to pass it on. So I think it is a very different experience for the second generation, and hopefully the presence of the lessons means that parents now might feel confident to register their children as Alevi on school admissions forms, that schools might be able to know where to go to find out something about it, to be more inclusive in their practices towards pupils. But I think the most important thing that Alevi youth said to us as a result of the lessons is that they feel they don't have to explain their religion, that it's accepted as a religion in its own right, and that the school has conferred that legitimacy on it, and so it's given them respect.
And I think that to just add on to that point, especially at secondary school, when we did interview those who were taking these lessons, after a year, they told us that we had a tension. Always there was a tension between between my Muslim friend and me, especially on Fridays, when they were always asked to go to mosque. And he said, look, we are good friends, but when they ask me to go to mosque, I say I don't go. And there was always kind of a pressure. He felt the pressure. Now he said, because these lessons are taught to everyone in the classroom, and they know that there are people who are called Alevis, and they see themselves as Alevis, so they accept their identity. He said, now we have a greater friendship, because the person is not asking me to go to mosque anymore. He accepted me as an Alevi, and he said, what's more, they are not asking me what Alevism is. And it was a burden on the second generation Alevi young people especially. But now that it is there, it is being in a way recognized by institutions, and it's been taught, they feel more confident, more accepted, and I think they feel that they are part of a greater multicultural environment. They feel different but equal to other peers. So in that sense, it will
only for the external audience, external people, or for like internal
understanding. I think both. There is a dialogue between the external and internal. So it is feeding each other, and I think there is a much positive and sharper Alevi identity. And yes, I think they are feeling much closer to the Alevi community by having this, because in the past it was seen as a negative identity. And so many Alevis, actually, I was surprised when I was doing research. We were there with Celia many times to hear from parents who have been here for 10, 15 years. They had this fear of kind of declaring their identity publicly as Alevis. And remember, one of the mothers said, I am really worried that my child will be in trouble again, because we ran away from Turkey because of our Alevi identity. We wanted to forget it. We want to have a new life, but here again there are Alevi material, Alevi talks, Alevi discourses, Alevi discussions. I'm so worried, she said, my child, and I could understand her anxiety, but it is changing. It is changing. It is giving people confidence. It is going towards a better direction, as far as we can see. I mean, we are still in the field. We are still doing research there, and that's what.
And also, if I'm not wrong, the initial results of the lessons show that actually their school performance, overall school performance, increased, right?
Yeah.
So not only in that course, but also in other courses as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because they felt a sense of belonging, it did impact on their achievement. But also the community is now able to generate their own resources and for RE lessons, and the community centres have been teaching our Alevism for a long time, and obviously they're teaching about how to be Alevi, but which is slightly different from what we're doing. But nevertheless, there's much more work going on.
How many schools use the material?
It's hard to know, but possibly I would say maybe 10 to 15 at the moment. But we haven't actually published the kind of final curriculum, but we're hoping to do so in the next sort of few months, and then hopefully we'll be able to take it to conferences and attract kind of educational audiences to disseminate it more widely.
But two of the schools that we are working closely with, one is in Enfield, the other one is in Highbury, Islington. So one is a primary school, the other one is a secondary school. These are the two schools that we are going and constantly, regularly visiting and following up. I was going to say something, but I forgot it. Maybe if I remember.
Okay.
Important. Yeah.
Well, this was really very interesting, and please join me in thanking our speakers. And it became richer with your questions as well.
Which school have you listened to? Is that the primary or
It's a secondary school.
Which is amazing.
Which university? I met you before. UCL.
I think, I went to this one.
Yes, of course. We met before, but I'm also working. Resim was working also, but I was doing my PhD. He was ahead of me 2 years, so we were going to the same community center, and his project was amazing. I was very jealous of him because he was doing something, because funerals were, this was a very important thing that brought people together to express. And he recently organized a university paper. Funerals were not accepted by the mosques, and one of the reasons why they established it in 1992 in a place to tell their funeral. Mosques were not allowed. And myself, when I came in 1993, an elderly person died in a hospital. They at least to do some middle funerals. I said, no, we're not pushing you up because you never came to mosque before. And what happened, funny, they were living in Northern, for example, because the community is so big, and they wanted to go to the house, actually, the funeral, and they were